If Water 7 was the arc that got me into One Piece, Thriller Bark was the arc that got me out of One Piece. So in the last video, and the first I ever made of this series, my introduction to One Piece was Water 7, and it was pretty awesome. And then I continued with Thriller Bark, and it was pretty boring, and I kinda dropped the series from there. Which makes sense because this is considered one of its weakest arcs. If you've kept up with this series of videos, you know I've had my fair share of criticisms against this manga. But this here is our first stinker One Piece saga. At least that's what most seem to believe. But now I'm here reading this arc properly like I did with Water 7 and seeing how it all holds up. My first impression when reading Thriller Bark was... what the hell? We left off on this insane cliffhanger at the end of Post Annie's Lobby and then immediately transitioned to... not that. I'm not saying the next chapter has to build off of this right away, build up, etc, etc. But looking at the chapter count, it seems like we're not gonna get back to this for a while. Just saying, it's a bit of a cock tease, if you will. I will say, the beginning of this arc is pretty damn good. I love the addition of Brook. He's an incredibly charming character with easily one of the best backstories in the series. I didn't care that much about Laboon at first, but now, Brook meeting Laboon is one of my most anticipated moments for the ending of One Piece. This is also easily one of the most interesting islands we've encountered. It's like this horror/Victorian island with zombies and giant spiders. You can check out this video from my buddy Kumo Bear, but as he said, Oda's creativity really shines in this arc in particular. However, as the arc went on, my engagement waned more and more. This was the first time I ever had to sit down and take a break from One Piece. I was getting kind of exhausted reading this. I think there are a handful of issues that do make this arc a problem for me, but there was always one I could think of off the top of my head. So what's the main problem with this arc? It's too long. It's too fucking long. This arc should be like 20-something chapters, even 30, almost 50. That's too much. No more, no mas. I do genuinely feel like there are parts of this arc that feel dragged on, specifically the Straw Hats versus Oars fight, which is conceptually pretty cool in a lot of ways, but it comes together to feel very monotonous, especially when a lot of it can feel like padding. All in an arc that doesn't do enough for the overall story to justify its length. It also doesn't help that this arc is mashed between two of the most highly acclaimed arcs in the series, so not only are you disappointed after Water 7 redefined your standards for this manga, but as you're reading, you're yearning to get to Marineford already. Based on how the Oars fight was going along, I developed sort of a theory as to how Oda goes about writing One Piece. I could be completely wrong and I have no true basis other than the story that's been presented in my eyes, but this is just what I've observed. I feel that Oda focuses more on planning ahead for future events rather than the next chapter. So he makes these chapters that kind of feel like fluff or just adding more to a given event for the sake of it in order to give him more thinking space to plan out the biggest arcs or moments he wants to tell, which is how he's able to keep consistency without going on hiatus or something. This leads to fantastic future events and great world building. That's good! But it also makes a lot of One Piece feel like a drag sometimes, and fights like this feel prolonged for the sake of being prolonged.
That's bad.
Seriously, I'm binging this and it feels like a drag. I cannot imagine having to wait week to week for basically, they're fighting the dude. More fighting the dude. They're still fighting the dude, but there's also a couple pages dedicated to something else. And it doesn't help that neither Moria or Oars are especially great villains. I will say that Moria is at least more threatening than some of the weaker One Piece villains. It's not like Mr. 3 or something where I'm at awe at how the main characters are able to take him so seriously, but they're still not enough to elevate this arc for me, especially when the conflict is not tied to any emotional narrative like Robin was to Enies Lobby, Vivi to Alabasta, Nami to Arlong Park. Brook and Moria or anyone involved in Thriller Bark does not have that same kind of emotional conflict. At this point, the general format of One Piece really started to take a toll on me. Maybe not necessarily the structure. I wouldn't say One Piece arcs are structured the same way, as the way they get to their big fights are all pretty different. But there is a noticeable feeling of repetition in One Piece. Like, when an arc isn't especially great, things start to feel very samey. When you think about it, so many crazy things are happening in this arc, which in theory should make it exciting. I mean, a whole ass wedding ceremony gets stopped by Sanji, then a giant zombie comes out, then all of a sudden the Straw Hats except Luffy have to stop it, then Robin gets her shadow stolen. Conceptually, this should be nuts, but this is also weirdly normal for One Piece. One Piece arcs always have crazy shit, constantly switching perspectives or fights, big panels of a bunch of characters doing crazy special moves, explosions. Because One Piece is so accustomed to being pretty bloated and kind of like, I guess like grand scale if you will, like a bunch of crazy stuff happening all at once, it makes this fight and arc in general feel like more of the same and kind of makes it a tad bit boring. Despite all of that, I still think this arc is structurally pretty sound, as every other One Piece arc has been up to this point. When it comes to this series, I've noticed that it's not really the core narrative a given arc is trying to tell that's bad. The quality of a One Piece arc for me will come down to a few things. Was the antagonist good? How important was this arc to the overall world? The moments featured in this arc, the characters featured, and something I've realized, do you get that sort of emotional narrative you get with some of the best arcs? Those are the key things that make up the experience and that separate the good arcs from the mid arcs. So when you remove all of that, you're just kind of left with all of the style of One Piece with none of the investment. But despite me saying this, overall, I wouldn't say the arc is bad. I wouldn't even say it's particularly poorly written. In fact, I'd say this arc has a lot of cool qualities. It really was the horror Halloween vibes that kept me going, along with some of those cool bursts of creativity and Brook, who apparently is at his best in this arc, as from what I know, he doesn't seem to do all too much later on, so, but we'll see. And it's hard to talk about this arc without mentioning the acclaimed Nothing Happened scene. Oh my god, the moment Kuma popped into the story, fantastic. I'm invested again, and we're going back to the cool shit. There's a good amount to like here, but I just think it has a lot going against it. It's too long, it's mashed between two of the best arcs in the series, and is off the back of one of the most exciting cliffhangers in the series, which kind of leads to this arc feeling like this sort of weird edging period, if you will, which is not inherently bad. I think taking a break and having this more light arc is fine to prepare for the next apparently big arc, but I still would have preferred for this arc to just be a bit more condensed, and I don't think it does enough to push the story of One Piece forward to warrant it being like almost 50 chapters. Since this arc counts as just one saga, I'm just gonna rank it as such. So on the tier list, I'm gonna give Thriller Bark a C tier, and for a numerical ranking, I'm feeling a decent to strong 5 on this record.